Now let's talk about Apple, because Apple's coronavirus woes are far from over. The tech giant warned that its iPhone supply will be temporarily constrained as production in China is resuming more slowly than expected. Now still, it will depend on how long factories stay at diminished capacity. And joining us to discuss is Wang, principal analyst at Constellation Research. Ray, thanks for coming back on, and I understand you're in Cupertino right now, so really at ground zero there.
I am actually. It's a beautiful day out here, but too bad we've got some issues on supply chain risk and consumer demand.
That's right. And what are you hearing in general, I guess, from Apple investors and from the street? Because Apple in the last year has been a remarkable story. I mean, I keep bringing this up on our live shows, but last January, I think it was January 2, we had that warning about iPhone sales in China, and people thought, uh-oh. And then Apple stock just killed it for about 10 or 11 months.
Yeah, I think the challenge here really is how long will this coronavirus go? When we talk to companies about what's happening with the coronavirus and Apple suppliers, the number one question really is when can we get our people back to work, and what's going to be the impact to China demand? Right, those all have implications. But the long-term outlook for Apple is actually really, really good because they've got that whole services business that is ramping up. And as people subscribe to those services, they're less reliant on the number of devices that are out there. They're more reliant on how much they can actually sell to each individual with those devices. And with like 1.2 billion devices out there, it's a great base, right? So that's actually why we're really interested, in them. But the short-term piece really is around what's going on with this WHO data, the data coming out of China. Any first-year epidemiology student would tell you that, you had 50,000 on the first set of transmission. That second set should have been a bigger bump than 50,000. And so we're a little worried that the data is suspect, or there's underreporting, or not enough testing kits going on. So if this thing drags out past May, we have a huge issue, especially finally if the WHO calls it a pandemic. But prior to that, though, I mean, this next set of quarters, what people are looking at in terms of demand, it's really going to be, can we have the supply to handle the SE launch? And will there be enough supply to actually handle the next 5G launch? That's going to be the question people are going to ask. But that ramp-up period doesn't happen until June. So I think they still have some time to figure out what's going on. And that's why I think we're a little bit hedged on the coronavirus fears, and we still think that it's still worth 350.
Well, one of the concerns is if the 5G launch is after the holiday season, could that have a real adverse effect on the stock?
It could if we're past the November, December season, right? If we miss that holiday season, it's going to be a big deal. But I think there's also been a push to move some of the supplier base outside of China. And I think this is giving Foxconn and others some caution to say, hey, maybe we should move this out further, right? But it still takes a while. I mean, we're talking like 9-month, 12-month lag periods to get a plant up and running.
Hey, Ray, it's Heidi here. So when we're talking about supply chain, I mean, we've dealt with something called the trade war for quite some time, and Apple said then that they were planning to move some supply chains outside of China. Do you think that they're less exposed now than they were, say, the same period last year?
If you mean less, like by 20, 30%, then yes. Is it the entire production line? No, right? There's still a lot. I mean, given the scale that Foxconn has been able to create in China, along with the other suppliers, it's kind of hard to move all that out at once, right? But you're seeing beneficiaries in Vietnam, you're seeing beneficiaries in other countries, even in the U.S., right? Maybe they will build that plant I think it's in Wisconsin, I believe, that they're trying to get up there. So there's some risk there. But I think, by the time summer rolls out, I mean, honestly, by the end of March, we can tell whether the WHO numbers are right and China's numbers are right. The epidemiologists that are working on this can tell you that, hey, transmission rates are going to be higher or lower. It looks like there's a low on transmission rates in China, but I think it's actually a testing issue. So I think that's what people are looking for. But, you'll see many flare-ups in different countries. But let's put this into perspective. 80,000 people die in vehicle accidents a year. Coronavirus isn't really that big of a deal, but it is because it's something we can control. So.
Ray, if we go back to what you said about Apple in the long term and the bullishness about services, it's interesting because when Apple put out that warning about iPhone sales in China, that was when you started to see in the first half of 2019, everyone talking more about the services. Oh, I'm still bullish because of services. It's all about services now. But what's interesting to me is that then when the iPhone sales numbers kind of looked a little better than the initial warning, and especially now with the excitement about 5G phones, I feel like the narrative has shifted back to the story for Apple is iPhones. It's about the hardware. It's about selling iPhones. And that's a little bit why the Foxconn plant, shutting down temporarily and now trying to lure workers back with bonuses and all the reports there, why the coronavirus stuff does matter so much, because I still feel like for most investors, Apple is the maker of iPhones. That's the big attraction.
It is true, right? But they go hand in hand, right? So if you're getting, let's say we move to subscription revenue models, which they did. You can get an iPhone for $20 a month. You can get the upgrade on top of that $20, right? Now the question is, did you get the Apple TV Plus? Did you subscribe to Apple Arcade? Are you applying, subscribing to other types of service with the Apple Card, right? And that does add up. So of that services number, the $20 represents anywhere from 50 to 60% of the services today. But over time, that $20 or even $30 over time, that may be smaller and smaller part as they continue to add additional revenue per user, right? The metrics are changing from hardware unit sales to ARPU. The metrics are changing to customer acquisition costs dropping because you're selling additional services in. The metrics are changing again because I actually can figure out my retention rate and customer satisfaction based on renewals and subscription rates. And I think that's really the longer term picture.
Well, Ray, let's talk about why you're even over there in Cupertino, because Investor Day kicking off tomorrow. We talk a lot about 5G, but that hasn't even been confirmed yet by Apple to come this fall. So do you expect to hear anything in that regard? And what else are you expecting from Investor Day?
I'm not sure what's going to happen in Investor Day. You never know, right? So I would say that, like 5G launch is something people keep talking about, but I think they'll probably emphasize what's happening with the new SE, the lower cost model that they're trying to get out into the market. I think they're going to talk about some of the growth that they've had in subscriptions. We've been hearing a lot of conversations about the streaming wars. Is it going to be Disney Plus? Is it going to be Apple? Is Netflix going to be in the mix? What's going to happen on that regard? And then, of course, I think people are kind of curious are there any more new full Mac hardware that's coming out the door? Anything more that, hardware that's coming with watch, any kind of accessories with Beats, as well as what's going on. So there's a little bit of that product and there's a little bit of services. I think you'll get a little bit of both at that Investor Day. Full disclosure, I actually live in this town, so I walked over.
Very convenient. All right,
Jumped over the
Ray
fence.
Wang in Cupertino wearing the AirPods. Thanks so much for joining us.
Take care.
Hey investors, Zach Guzman here. Are you interested in learning more about the markets and getting the latest financial news? Well, then click right here to subscribe to our Yahoo Finance YouTube channel. Get the latest up-to-the-minute market analysis, big interviews in the world of finance, and information on how to manage your money every day wherever you are.